Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one. This is not background noise, and it is not a message meant to drift past you. This is direct, intentional, and precise. There has been a quiet strain on you lately, not loud enough for others to notice, but constant enough that you cannot ignore it. You have carried fatigue that sleep did not fully touch, pressure that did not come from one clear source, moments of isolation where even familiar spaces felt slightly distant, confusion without chaos, tired yet alert, still moving but aware that something has been weighing on you. This message arrives because of that tension, not in spite of it. You may have questioned why ordinary tasks demanded more energy than usual, or why your thoughts kept returning to the same unresolved feeling. You might have noticed yourself going quiet when you usually speak, slowing down when the world expected speed. None of this came with a clear explanation, and that uncertainty has been part of the weight. There is no alarm here, no threat, no attempt to provoke fear. What you are experiencing does not require panic. It requires understanding. You have not been breaking down. You have been passing through something dense, something real, something that tested your internal structure without announcing itself. And the fact that you are still standing still, functioning still aware, matters more than you realize. This is not a generic reassurance offered to anyone who happens to be tired. This message is personal. It intersects with specific moments you remember, decisions you made while exhausted, days you showed up when it would have been easier to withdraw, times you kept your balance without knowing why it mattered. You are here because something counted you out before you were finished moving through it. And yet, you kept walking. You may not have named it that way. You may not have framed it as survival or endurance. You simply did what you always do. You regulated, you adapted, you stayed present. But there is meaning in that steadiness, and clarity is now required, so you do not misinterpret what just passed through your life. Nothing about this message is rushed, but it is timely. You are not being told everything at once. You are being invited into understanding at the pace your system can hold. Stay with this, not because something bad is coming, but because something you already lived through is finally ready to be understood. This is for you, and it is important to remove any uncertainty about that now. Not everyone listening will recognize themselves in what is being described. Some will hear it as interesting language. Others will nod and move on. But you felt a quiet recognition as soon as this began. Not excitement, not fear, recognition. That response is the first indicator that this message intersects with your lived experience, not an abstract idea. You are addressed as chosen one, not as a title to elevate you, but as a designation that describes function. It points to how you respond under pressure, not how you appear when things are easy. What occurred recently did not happen around you. It happened through you. You were not observing a difficult period from the outside. You were inside it, moving forward while it applied force. You did not consciously activate strength. You did not prepare yourself with affirmations or strategies in advance. You simply remained intact. That distinction matters. Most people recognize strain only when it overwhelms them. You recognized it while remaining operational. You noticed the drag, the resistance, the narrowing of emotional bandwidth, yet you continued to make measured decisions. You stayed coherent without needing to explain yourself to anyone. That is not learned behavior in the moment. That is baseline stability revealing itself. There is a difference between struggling loudly and absorbing pressure quietly. You did not collapse, and you did not perform resilience for others to see. You regulated internally. You adjusted your pace. You conserved energy without withdrawing from responsibility. Even when clarity was partial, your center held. This message is not assigning you an identity you must grow into later. It is naming an identity that has already been demonstrated. The evidence is not symbolic. It is practical. You stayed present when disengagement would have been understandable. You stayed grounded when distraction was readily available. You remained yourself when circumstances attempted to fragment attention and drain focus. Others might have needed validation, reassurance, or explanation to endure what you endured. You did not. You carried on with a quiet steadiness that did not announce itself. That does not make you invulnerable. It makes you structured. The reason this matters now is because people often mislabel this kind of experience. They assume numbness, burnout, or emotional shutdown. That assumption is inaccurate. What you displayed was unconscious resistance, a system that knows how to hold pressure without panic. You are not being singled out for praise. You are being identified for clarity. Understanding who this message is for allows you to stop questioning whether what you felt was imagined or exaggerated. It was neither. It was real. It involved you directly. And it revealed something about your internal design that is now ready to be understood. There is one experience you likely recognized immediately, even if you never named it out loud. A heaviness that was not emotional in the usual sense. Not sadness, not anxiety, not exhaustion alone. It felt more like carrying extra gravity, as if your body and mind were moving through thicker air. Simple things required intention. Focus took effort. Rest helped, but did not fully reset you. At first, you may have judged this sensation. You may have wondered if you were losing motivation, becoming disengaged, or falling behind. You may have questioned your discipline, your drive, or your resilience. That self-questioning is understandable, but it is not accurate. This was not a flaw. It was a signal. Your system was responding to sustained pressure by shifting into conservation mode. When pressure extends beyond what can be released quickly, a well-regulated system does not panic. It slows. It prioritizes. It narrows focus to what is essential and reduces unnecessary output. What you experienced was not collapse. It was intelligent adaptation. You were not becoming weaker. You were becoming more selective. This is why the sensation felt unfamiliar. You are used to movement, productivity, and engagement being relatively fluid. When that flow thickened, you interpreted it as a problem to fix. In reality, it was information being delivered through sensation. Your body and mind were signaling that something in your environment or internal field had intensified. Instead of producing distress, your system absorbed it. That absorption created weight. The weight created fatigue. The fatigue prompted questions. But the core structure remained stable. Many people respond to similar pressure with agitation or emotional volatility. You did not. Others attempt to escape it through distraction, overexertion, or numbness. You resisted that instinct without consciously deciding to. You stayed present even when presence felt heavier than usual. That presence is the key. This symptom did not impair your judgment. It did not disconnect you from reality. It did not make you reckless or withdrawn. It simply altered your pacing. That is not a malfunction. That is a system preserving integrity. You may have noticed that during this period, you became less reactive, less interested in unnecessary conflict, less pulled toward external validation. This was not indifference. It was compression. Energy was being routed inward to maintain coherence under load. Once you understand this, the confusion lifts. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start recognizing. Something required more from my system, and it responded appropriately. This reframing matters because mislabeling a signal creates unnecessary doubt. You were not failing to cope. You were coping efficiently. And this is only the surface layer. The heaviness was not random. The timing was not accidental. And the fact that you remained functional while carrying it points to a deeper interaction that is now ready to be examined calmly and clearly. What you were responding to did not originate from a single event, a single thought, or a single person. That is why it was difficult to name. The pressure was distributed, subtle, layered. It arrived without announcement and without drama, yet it was coordinated in its effect. This is important to say plainly and without embellishment. There was opposition present, but not in the form people usually imagine. No dramatic confrontations, no obvious external conflict. Instead, it expressed itself as compression, as narrowing, as a steady attempt to reduce your internal margin for clarity and choice. The pressure targeted timing. It arrived during a period when you were already moving forward, already carrying responsibility, already maintaining momentum. It did not seek to stop you outright. It sought to slow you just enough to create doubt about your own pace. You may have noticed interruptions that seemed minor on their own. Delays that were not catastrophic yet persistent. Moments where your attention was pulled in multiple directions without resolution. None of these elements were overwhelming individually. Together, they created load, and still you remained functional. That detail cannot be overlooked. Under sustained diffuse pressure, many people lose coherence. They become reactive. They misattribute the source of their strain. They turn inward with criticism or outward with blame. You did neither. You continued to show up. You continued to make measured choices. You continued to regulate your emotional output, even when internal resources were being taxed. This is where clarity replaces confusion. The pressure was real. It was recent, and it was not random. It did not escalate because escalation would have revealed itself too clearly. Instead, it attempted to blend into your daily rhythm, hoping to be misread as personal limitation. The goal was not collapse. The goal was erosion, a gradual wearing down of certainty and self-trust. But erosion requires friction without structure. You have structure. Your system did not absorb the pressure blindly. It redistributed it. It adjusted your pace. It tightened your focus. You may not have consciously recognized this as resistance, but resistance does not always announce itself as struggle. Sometimes it looks like steadiness under conditions that would typically destabilize. You stayed oriented. You stayed aware. You stayed grounded in reality, even when the environment subtly attempted to disorganize your internal sense of sequence and timing. This is not interpretation after the fact. This is observation. The confrontation did not end because the pressure disappeared. It ended because it failed to produce the intended effect. You passed through it intact. You did not fragment. You did not disengage from yourself. And now that you are no longer in the center of that compression, understanding can surface without urgency. What comes next is not speculation. It is a breakdown. A calm examination of the specific pressure points that were applied and how your internal regulation held through each one. To understand what you moved through, it helps to slow this down and separate the experience into its components, not to dramatize it, but to make it legible. When pressure is diffuse, it often feels overwhelming because it is unnamed. Once it is broken into parts, clarity replaces distortion. The first pressure point was doubt, but not the obvious kind. It was not loud questioning or spiraling thoughts. It was subtle. It showed up as a quiet erosion of certainty about timing. You did not doubt your direction. You doubted the pace. You wondered whether you were late, slow, or somehow out of sync. The pressure did not try to convince you that you were wrong. It tried to convince you that you were behind. And yet, even while that thought passed through you, did not abandon your path. You continued forward without rushing to compensate. That restraint is not accidental. It shows trust in internal sequencing rather than external comparison. The second pressure point was fear, but again, not fear with sharp edges. This was not panic or anticipation of disaster. It was low-grade unease, a sense that something could go wrong without knowing what. Many people respond to this by tightening excessively or by over-preparing. You did not. You acknowledged the sensation without letting it dictate behavior. You allowed uncertainty to exist without demanding immediate resolution. That ability to coexist with the unknown without escalation is a form of emotional regulation that only appears under sustained load. The third pressure point was energy drain. This is where the experience became physical. You noticed reduced stamina, slower recovery, and a need for more intentional rest. The key detail is that you did not override this signal. You adjusted. You conserved. You did not collapse, but you also did not push recklessly. Many people misinterpret this phase and shame themselves for not performing at previous levels. You did not. Did. You treated your energy as a resource to be managed, not a flaw to be corrected. That decision preserved coherence rather than fragmenting it. The fourth pressure point was isolation, though not in the form of abandonment. People were still around. Communication still occurred. But there was a sense that no one could fully see what you were carrying. This kind of isolation is particularly destabilizing for many because it invites over-explanation or withdrawal. You chose neither. You did not demand to be understood, and you did not disappear. You stayed relational without overexposing your internal state. That balance protected your center. The fifth pressure point was delay. This may have been the most testing because it challenged your sense of momentum. Things did not move as quickly or as cleanly as expected. Progress required patience without passivity. Delay often triggers impulsive decisions or self-sabotage. You did not react that way. You continued to act where action was appropriate and waited where waiting was required. You did not confuse stillness with stagnation. That distinction is rare under pressure. What matters most is not that these pressure points existed. What matters is how your system responded to each one. You did not meet doubt with overthinking. You did not meet fear with avoidance. You did not meet fatigue with self-criticism. You did not meet isolation with withdrawal. You did not meet delay with desperation. Instead, you stayed regulated. Regulation does not mean feeling nothing. It means feeling without being controlled by what is felt. Throughout this period, you remained capable of reflection, decision-making, and presence. Even when clarity was incomplete, your internal compass did not spin wildly. It held steady enough to guide you forward. This is why the experience did not break you, even though it applied pressure at multiple points simultaneously. The structure was already there. The pressure revealed it. It did not create it. Seeing this clearly allows you to release unnecessary self-questioning. You do not need to analyze every moment for hidden mistakes. You moved through a complex coordinated strain and remained intact. That is not coincidence. That is not luck. That is not accidental endurance. It is evidence of an internal coherence that now deserves to be recognized calmly and without exaggeration. Now that distance exists between you and that period evaluation becomes possible without distortion. You are no longer inside the pressure reacting to it in real time. You are looking back with perspective, and perspective changes the questions you ask. Instead of wondering why it felt heavy, you begin to see how consistently you remained aligned. Reviewing what occurred, one detail becomes increasingly clear. The way you moved through that stretch cannot be explained by chance, favorable circumstances, or external support alone. There were no dramatic interventions that removed the weight for you. There was no sudden clarity that made everything easy. What carried you through was internal consistency. You did not fracture under complexity. You did not become incoherent when multiple demands overlapped. You did not lose your sense of self while adapting to shifting conditions. That matters because coherence under load is not a personality trait. It is a structural quality. Many people rely on motivation, mood, or reassurance to sustain them. When those fluctuate, stability disappears. You did not depend on those variables. Your steadiness did not rise and fall dramatically with external input. It was quieter than that, more reliable. Looking back, you can likely identify moments where you could have reacted differently. You could have pushed harder to escape discomfort. You could have disengaged to avoid strain. You could have rushed decisions just to feel movement again. You did none of those things. Even when you did not know why restraint mattered, you practiced it. That is not accidental behavior. This review removes explanations that would minimize what happened. It was not simply a busy season. It was not ordinary stress that anyone could handle the same way. The pattern of pressure and your pattern of response are too specific for that conclusion. You maintained continuity of thought. You maintained continuity of values. You maintained continuity of behavior. That continuity is the confirmation. It tells you that the stability you experienced was not something you generated temporarily. It was already integrated into how you function. The pressure tested it, but it did not invent it. What emerged under strain was what was already there, beneath the surface. Understanding this helps correct a common misinterpretation. People often believe strength appears only when effort is visible. In reality, the most reliable forms of strength look unremarkable from the outside. They express themselves as steadiness, moderation, and refusal to be pulled off center. That is what you displayed. This is not about reframing the past to feel better about it. It is about accurately naming what occurred so you do not misjudge yourself going forward. If you attribute your stability to luck, you underestimate your capacity. If you dismiss it as nothing special, you fail to learn from it. Recognition does not inflate ego. It anchors self-trust. You are not being asked to change how you operate. You are being asked to recognize that what carried you through was not fragile. It is repeatable because it is structural. It does not depend on perfect conditions. This realization prepares you for what follows, not with urgency, but with quiet confidence. When pressure appears again in different form, you will not need to wonder whether you can remain intact. You already have. It helps now to place your experience alongside what typically happens to people under far less pressure. Not to elevate you, and not to diminish others, but to establish proportion. Most people, when faced with sustained uncertainty, lose presence quickly. Their attention fractures. Emotions swing wider. Decision-making becomes reactive. Even mild, prolonged strain often produces irritability, withdrawal, or impulsive attempts to regain control. This is not a flaw. It is a common human response when internal resources are stretched. What stands out in your case is not that you felt pressure. It is that you remained available to reality while under it. You did not check out. You did not numb yourself into distraction. You did not outsource your stability to noise, validation, or urgency. You stayed in contact with what was happening without being consumed by it. That level of presence is uncommon, especially when the pressure does not have a clear beginning or end. Many people require visible markers to remain stable. Clear timelines, clear feedback, clear reassurance. When those are missing, anxiety fills the gap. You operated differently. You tolerated ambiguity without inventing stories to soothe it. You allowed uncertainty to exist without rushing to resolve it prematurely. This is not about being tougher or more capable in a general sense. It is about having a nervous system and internal framework that do not require constant reinforcement to stay coherent. That quality does not appear often, and when it does, it usually develops over time through experience, not intention. Another difference is how you related to yourself during the strain. Many people turn against themselves when things feel heavy. They criticize their performance. They question their worth. They apply pressure on top of pressure. You did not do that. Even when you noticed reduced capacity, you did not attach moral judgment to it. You adjusted without contempt. That alone separates your response from the majority. You also remained functional in the external world. You continued to meet obligations. You continued to engage appropriately. You did not dramatize your internal state, nor did you suppress it. You held it privately while still participating in life. That balance is rare under load. Rarity does not mean superiority. It means infrequency. Most people are not asked to hold themselves together without clear signals, guidance, or relief. When they are, the system often buckles. Yours did not. That does not make you immune to strain. It indicates that your baseline tolerance is higher than average and that your response to pressure is measured rather than chaotic. Understanding this comparison is not meant to isolate you. It is meant to normalize why others may not fully understand what you move through. They did not experience the same internal conditions. They are not designed to respond the same way. You do not need recognition from others for this to be valid. The evidence is in your behavior, not in anyone's reaction to it. This rarity is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply holds. And now that it has been revealed through experience, it can be named without ego and without denial. What this experience clarifies is something subtle but essential about you. Your stability is not something that turns on in moments of crisis. It is not an emergency response. It is not a heightened state you access only when required. It is baseline. It is how you are built to operate when conditions become complex. Many people think strength appears when pressure arrives. In reality, pressure only exposes what is already present. What was revealed in you was not intensity, force, or extraordinary effort. It was coherence. An internal structure that does not rely on constant reinforcement to stay aligned. You did not become someone else during that period. You did not rise into a heroic version of yourself. You stayed the same person functioning under different conditions. That distinction matters because it removes the temptation to mythologize what happened. This is not about destiny in a dramatic sense. It is about preparation. Your system has learned how to stay organized without excessive control. You can hold opposing inputs without becoming fragmented. You can experience uncertainty without losing orientation. These are not traits you activate. They are qualities that have been integrated over time through lived experience, reflection, and restraint. This is why you did not feel triumphant afterward. There was no surge of pride or relief. There was simply a quiet return to equilibrium. That is how baseline strength behaves. It does not celebrate survival. It assumes continuity. You may notice that even now you are not compelled to explain yourself to anyone. You are not seeking acknowledgement for what you endured. You are not eager to turn the experience into an identity story. That restraint is part of the same structure that carried you through. Identity in this context is not a label you wear. It is a pattern of response that repeats reliably under pressure. You respond by stabilizing. You respond by regulating. You respond by staying present without forcing resolution. This is why attempts to push you into urgency, panic, or extremes often fail. Your system defaults to balance, not because you avoid intensity, but because you do not confuse intensity with importance. Clarifying this identity does not change who you are. It removes doubt about what you are not. You are not fragile. You are not easily destabilized. You are not dependent on ideal conditions to function well. You are prepared in a quiet way. That preparation does not demand constant vigilance. It does not require you to harden yourself or anticipate threat everywhere. It simply means that when complexity arises, you meet it with structure rather than reaction. Understanding this allows you to move forward without carrying the residue of that period as unfinished business. It can be integrated cleanly without drama, without lingering questions. What remains now is not analysis, but orientation. How to live from this clarity without overemphasizing it, and how to let balance return fully without losing awareness. Now the emphasis shifts away from analysis and toward integration. Not because what happened is being dismissed, but because it no longer needs to occupy the foreground of your attention. Experiences like this are not meant to be revisited repeatedly. They are meant to be absorbed, aligned, and then allowed to settle. The first orientation is rest, but not collapse. You do not need to withdraw from life or disengage from responsibility to recover. What restores you is deliberate quiet, fewer inputs, less unnecessary stimulation, allowing your system to recalibrate without pressure to perform or explain. Rest for you is not inactivity. It is the absence of interference. The second orientation is discernment. You may notice that your tolerance for noise has decreased. Conversations, obligations, or environments that once felt neutral may now feel misaligned. This is not intolerance, it is clarity. You are allowed to choose what you give attention to without justifying it. Discernment preserves energy that has already been well spent. The third orientation is boundaries, particularly internal ones. You do not need to process every thought or feeling that passes through. Some sensations are echoes of what is already resolved. Let them pass without engagement. Boundaries at this stage are less about saying no to others and more about not reopening internal loops that have already closed. The fourth orientation is patience. Not waiting in uncertainty, but allowing timing to unfold without interference. You do not need to force movement to prove momentum. The steadiness you demonstrated does not disappear when things slow down. It remains active even in stillness, trusting that prevents unnecessary acceleration. The fifth orientation is focus, narrowing attention to what is directly in front of you, rather than scanning for what might return. You do not need to monitor for pressure. What you moved through did not weaken you. It refined your awareness. Focus now is about presence, not vigilance. Finally, there is balance. You are not meant to live in a heightened state of meaning-making. Life does not require constant interpretation. Ordinary moments matter again. Simplicity is not regression. It is integration. Let yourself return to routine without diminishing what you learned. None of these orientations require effort. They are adjustments, not tasks. You're not being asked to improve yourself or protect against future strain. You are being invited to live normally again with one difference. You now understand yourself more accurately. That understanding does not need to be announced. It does not need to be defended. It simply informs how you move, how you choose, and how you pace yourself. What you walked through has already resolved. What remains is alignment, not alertness. Presence, not preparation. The closing of this message is not abrupt, but it is deliberate. There is nothing left to uncover here, only something to seal. You can settle now. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing is unfinished. Nothing needs to be proven or protected. What you moved through did not leave a fracture behind. It revealed a strength that was already integrated, and now it can return to the background where it belongs. If there is one realization to hold gently, it is this: you did not survive by chance. You remained intact because your internal structure knew how to hold pressure without breaking rhythm. You walked through a period that miscounted you, not because you resisted loudly, but because you stayed coherent when coherence mattered. There is no need to replay the experience to extract more meaning. You have already absorbed what was necessary. Let the body soften. Let the mind widen. Let ordinary life resume its rightful place. Stability does not require ceremony. Carry this forward quietly. When complexity appears again in a different form, you will not need to ask whether you can handle it. You already know how you respond. You regulate. You adapt. You remain present. That knowledge does not make you rigid. It makes you flexible without losing center. Hold these affirmations simply without repetition or force. You remain steady under pressure. You trust your internal timing. You stay present without fear. If this message met you accurately, leave a comment with "I remember" or 777. It is not a signal to anyone else. It is a marker for you. If you want to continue exploring clarity like this, subscribe and stay with the channel. The next message will build naturally from here without urgency and without excess. For now, return to your life. Move at your own pace. Remain grounded. You were counted out. You kept walking, and you are still here.